So hello, this is a pre-recording for this coming Tuesday's Cosmos Café. We have Marco Massi here. He had participated along with a few others in the Infinite Conversations Readers Underground group for the Life Divine by Sri Aurobindo. That's how we met, and through the conversations there, it came out that he had also gone through the educational system. He had produced recently his own book called Free Progress Education, and it's a vision of sorts, which we'll get into a bit later. But so it's good to have you here, Marco.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Hi, Doug.
So in doing some of the research here, I noticed that you had been thinking for quite a while about this free progress education. There was an exchange with another fellow Aurobindo participant, Don Salmon, who online you mentioned kind of the workings, and I think it was 2014 when your thoughts were arising.
Don Salmon, yeah.
Okay. And I found it interesting that you almost went into becoming a teacher to see what it was like from the inside, in order to this vision that you had. You wanted this to become not just more talk. You wanted to, it was almost an undercover examination there. So
yeah,
I'm all about undercover work. I do that personally as well in my own line of work, trying to find the best way to go forward. So if you could say a little bit more of how this came about.
Well, that's a long story. You know, until the age of, let's say, until about 10 years ago, I was a quite conventional thinker. I had a vision, no vision at all. For me, schools were this, universities should be that, education was fine as it was. No, it was not fine. I had to complain about a lot of things, but there was not this awareness, this consciousness that I have developed later. This came only through my sufferance, so to speak, by going through the system, where at last I asked myself, but why must be this process, this learning process in schools, in college, in university, and later also by doing research in university and so on. Why perceive I all of that as so suffocating? A lot of people find it wonderful, I'm okay with that, but I know a lot of people do not. Well, it came that I developed a lot of ideas about that, but I repressed them, so to speak, for a long time. But because I said, well, it's me. I'm a strange guy, which I am, of course, for sure. But it came not to my mind that it is not only my fault that I'm not adapting and I'm not just accepting the system as it is, but perhaps that the system is, in fact, an outdated system, the education system for sure, and that it needs a new vision and a new education paradigm, a new understanding of how education should work. And then I read a book of Lee Smolin, who is a famous physicist, and he has an interesting part of his book, The Trouble with Physics. It is named The Trouble with Physics. The second part, where he describes the social dynamics of how university works, and also from a social point of view, psychological point of view. And there, when I read that, I said, okay, now I'm not alone in thinking such kind of things. And well, of course, Google helped further, and I saw that a lot of people are thinking about new ideas of how reforming education. Not only reforming, but transforming, because it's no time to make another reform and another reform of education. And what is still missing for me nowadays is that we need to bring a new concept of education, not only in primary schools and middle schools, but also in high schools, colleges, and universities. And on this, I built also further, and I tried to expand further this libertarian and democratic point of view of education. Well, then I went to, I took up a job as a teacher because I wanted also to live. So I had went the other way around from university. Then I went to school, to a conventional school, where I clearly saw I could live by myself directly, daily, on a daily basis, what's the problem in school, at least in German schools is. And there you see also a lot of children and teenagers, youngsters, students suffering from that kind of system without knowing it. And that's the point. They don't know this. They feel that they are uncomfortable. They are unhappy, frustrated. But if you ask them, well, because I'm too lazy. And this is something that have been put in their head, this being lazy or not lazy. I don't believe that someone is lazy by nature. You become lazy eventually. But especially young people, there's this passion of learning, of knowing, of learning new things, of doing things. I think is innate in every one of us. It's part of the human nature. If this has gone, it's in reality it's not gone. It has been repressed. I think it's because something outside of you had repressed it. And so I saw, as a teacher, I was only 3 years teacher, but 3 years are enough to have an idea how things work. And yeah, then I came to some conclusions that I summarized then in this book entitled Free Progress Education.
Right, and you spoke just briefly there of the detrimental effects of something outside that doesn't allow for the student to flourish. I want to take it slow here and kind of not necessarily stick just with you, but I want you to give an example of this. There's a thread that we're talking about in the forum, just started yesterday, about Jeffrey Kripal's book, The Flip, in which he examines mainly scientists and professional academics who are strongly materialist, and then they have this flippant mentality into the spiritual side, whether it's through some mystical experience or they have been building up, and there's this moment that flips for them. I was wondering if you are able to identify that in yourself, coming from the sciences.
Yes and no. Let me say that this idea of a free progress education, well, the name I have hijacked from a spiritual community, that of Sri Aurobindo and Miral Fassa, who was she was a companion of Sri Aurobindo, spiritual companion of Sri Aurobindo, and she introduced this this expression, free progress education. And yes, there is the spiritual point of view in me, but I tried to keep this idea as secular as possible. I don't want to impose others my spiritual, mystical point of views, or I think what has been developed here is a vision that does not necessarily need or at least a mystical acceptance of reality. You must not be a yogi or someone who practices meditation or things like that. I am quite sure that it can be accepted also by the materialist and the atheist. It is, even though I express it as, I come then to the point that free progress education is about the freedom of the soul, is about the unfoldment and the idea to allow our inner being to unfold through an educational process. So you can see also, of course, this metaphysical aspect, but it's not necessary to believe or anything that is somehow transcendent or some. So it is, as I expressed, a secular point of view. Then everyone can make of it whatever they want. So, and I don't know if it is more difficult for the materialist to accept this approach, as long as we don't put into it some metaphysical, mystical conviction or teaching. After all, I think it is, for example, to accept that it is extremely important nowadays that the child, the student, and every one of us is free to express his or her inner and individual potential. It's something that we can agree on, whatever kind of religious or spiritual conviction we have or not. So this is, first of all, I would like to underline that. Also, if at the end, of course, behind that there is, of course, for me, also a metaphysical conviction, of course.
Yes. I did pick up that there's no mention of Aurobindo or the mother for a good reason.
Maybe I should, because perhaps it's not. Yeah, I may just in some note I will do this, I think. So because maybe so it's clear that it's not only my idea. After all, this idea, if you look, I found a couple of weeks ago that already the philosopher of enlightenment, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, had similar ideas in the, what was it, 16th century?
Contract or something?
I don't remember. Yeah, no, he wrote something special about education. I don't remember now. I didn't read through it, but I read some summaries of this. And after all, more or less the ideas were already there. And after 250 years, we are still here and discuss. So there's something wrong. There's something is going wrong, you understand? And I think it's a matter also, of course, of the development of consciousness, the evolution of consciousness. So we can see this also from this perspective. But I think the main mistake is that what we need today is not new ideas, but the practical application of these ideas. But sorry, I interrupted you now.
No. So I'm not familiar with Rousseau's educational writing, but he did do the social contract, which also is a current bridge into ideas such as universal basic income, new ideas of economy, which I noticed in the conclusion, you mentioned, in the conclusion of your book, you mentioned, well, I didn't touch on the economic malaise all too much, or the problems of the economy, because you see educational change or the flip in understanding of what learning is, what freedom in learning it means. That in your mind comes first. So you have a very broad vision of education that also ties in with the other aspects of society, such as 40-hour work weeks that take the family unit, separates the family from that, or the structure of how educational systems work, in that there's little fluidity of breaking it out of the boundary. There's a lot of talk, as you noticed. I'm in the library right now, and as I checked out the new books, there's 3 books. One's called Learning Without Classrooms. Another one is Pathways to Personalization, Timeless Learning. Khan did the One World Schoolhouse. These are all books that just came out. As you've been saying, this has been going on for years and years and years. So I'll allow you to continue on at this point, perhaps with the underlying reason why you see education as the core change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the core change, well, I don't want to sound apocalyptic, because it's not my style and not my conviction that, as some people have, that the world will end in the next few years. I'm quite, in this sense, I'm optimistic. But having said that, I think that humanity is now at a crossroad. In the next decades, we will have to make the right decisions, because we must rethink education as a precondition for the progress of humankind as a whole. Because, everyone knows there are these challenges of globalization, for example. We have these environmental issues. There is a potential of an environmental collapse, of a financial, economic collapse, as you said. Wars are still there. Ethnic conflicts also. We have this problem with migrations. And on the top of that, I would also put also something that frequently people don't cite is mental illnesses. And broadly speaking, an increasing frustration everywhere where I go, I see people increasingly frustrated. I saw this especially in children in schools. Where we live here in Germany, after all, is a relatively rich country, at least from a material point of view. People don't have the problems, or at least less problems. And also the children that I was in a private school, and they came not all from all rich families, but I saw also children coming from rich families, but who are full of frustrations and are very unhappy. This is a perfect example that money is not everything in life. No? And if we will not be able to tackle with these things, I think because these global issues have not only a material dimension, but also psychological dimension, and I don't say spiritual dimension, so to keep it secular. But how can I say, we need not only a new technological, material, financial approach, but also a completely new inner and psychological approach and understanding of humankind itself, and which must be reflected in education as well. If we don't reformulate from the bottom up all our educational system, we will have not mature and grown up people who are able to tackle with these problems, and then the world is really in a dangerous, will be in a increasingly dangerous situation. So I see education as a precondition to all the rest, which doesn't mean that this is the only thing, because the skills needed to tackle with these large-scale problems are not simply the intellectual, rational, analytic thinking. Something that in schools is emphasized. We urgently need to recover this inner potential of the individual, and this inner dimension. I think what the world needs is to get rid of this industrial, mechanical mindset of how education has to be done, conceived, and we need to recover the inner mental, cognitive, creative dimension that is there in each of us, which means keywords as creativity, imagination, curiosity, each one's originality and individual potential, the intuition, inspiration of the genius that is, I believe, in every one of us. And this must come to the surface. This must be fostered and encouraged. And this is what has to be freed and unleashed, so to speak. If we want to have later critical thinkers able to cope with the problem of the world, with the problems, plural, unfortunately not only one, many problems. But this is exactly what the opposite of what school and universities foster. They repress these qualities, and that's why I think it's so important. It's not just, oh, because I want to be free, it's so nice. And in this sense, I see the free progress education paradigm is that we need an education where people are free to progress. That's where also the name comes on. And here comes the thing that it is a soul growth education, where the soul is able and is free to develop itself. And it is a paradigm that sees education as the development, the unfoldment and expression of the child, the student, and why not also of the grown-up, of the adult, from the inside out, where education is a mean, an opportunity, which allows our inner being, our true soul, to grow by, yes, by an intellectual activity, but also by artistic and physical activities and other activities. But this can happen only if we allow children, teenagers, students, for being themselves, to be what they are really individually, without preconceived curricula and learning paths that are supposed to be good for all and are imposed from an upper hierarchy. I'm quite convinced that in the coming generations, more and more children will refuse to be pressed into a conventional school setting. Here in Germany, we have about, well, the statistics vary a lot, but we speak about 200, 300,000 dropouts per year from schools. This is an enormous number. And the worst thing is that in Germany, there's a law that allows also to jail children if they drop out. So it's about it seems that about 1,000 teenage children or teenagers go to jail because they drop out from school. Instead of putting them, I mean, I have a lot of problems to understand how this can be in a civilized society, but at any rate, it is useless to jail them. Just let's understand what is happening there. What is the reason? And I think the phenomenon can only worsen if the system won't change. Children will manifest more and more this desire of independence and self-development. I'm quite sure this will come up more and more in the next years or decades, right, or in the next generations.
I don't think we have the stats in front of us of the age of general dropout, but I'd say it's within the high school range of maybe, well, here in the States, 9 through 12. You won't see it in the younger generation because schooling, which this is something you note too, that elementary school, the middle school, the years from maybe 5-year to approximately 15, there's a lot more perhaps creativity or creative pathways in education already set in place.
Good point. Yeah.
And so the dropout rate is once there's this kind of self-thought or self-directed thought, and school does not produce that thought. But yeah, in Germany, you've got the negative route of jailing. You mentioned the unschoolers, which is essentially like homeschoolers here in the state, have to seek out legal advice, so they're not also sent in jail, and they're able to go in tandem with what is required by law. But even in more progressive locations like America with homeschooling, I think you made a brief statement, and it makes a lot more sense now why you're focused on the university and the high school groupings, is because say somebody is homeschooled, that once they reach that age, they will still have to perhaps go to a college that will be structured within the academic guidelines, or they'll have to be required to take these specific tests rather than seek out those projects, seek out the individual progressions and tangents and leadings. So perhaps you can say a little more on that focus there, that high school and university focus.
Yes, but my point is not so much that we should conceive different paradigms, and quite the contrary. We should, well, okay, you have, of course, to differentiate, and you cannot put everything on the same level and generalize. But I don't see this great difference in approach of education in high school, college, and university, and that of school, primary school, middle school, high school. And also this idea that we have this age-related schooling. At that age, you have to learn this. At that age, you have to learn that. Or we should begin to question even also this, I would say. And I don't know if it really makes sense to make this clear-cut divisions between school and university. Even though, of course, a 6-year-old child will have to learn something else than someone who is going for a PhD. But it's perhaps also this that we should reconsider. Find what are the core values and see how in the different contexts they can be applied. But agree that these core values must be respected at every level, I think. It is about self-initiative, self-directed education. self-directed learning in an environment where children, youngsters, teenagers, students, and also grown-up adults are allowed to think by themselves and learn by themselves, and by the way also teach themselves and teach others also. We should no longer see these as luxuries, but on the contrary, we need to become these as core values that become an everyday necessity in the method of being and learning, which of course means also that we need a completely new mindset and rethink from scratch how education is practiced. But not only that, because that has already been done since centuries now, I think. But we think we have to rethink also the environment in which it takes place. And this is what must be completely transformed. Also our structure and also infrastructure. It's also about brick and mortars, buildings. But as primarily, I think we must have clear ideas what we want to eliminate, and then also have clear ideas what should be replaced. Because people, it's, as we said before, it's easy to complain if we don't have then as a solution or an idea how to replace the things about which we are complaining. I think the main things that we, from becoming more concrete and making more precise examples now, I think the main things that we have to eliminate is, for example, the compulsory curricula, syllabus. We have to eliminate grades, exams, certificates, eventually also compulsory attendance, and to rethink and think more critically about this purely intellectual, data-driven blackboard teaching. This is where the teacher is in the front of it, writes something on the blackboard. Children have to take notice, learn it. And this is also something that we have to reconsider. But the question is, so far, a lot of people nowadays, fortunately, begin to agree on that. What is less clear is how these things can be replaced. And I think the only way is to replace these things by a self-chosen learning path, so to speak. And there are different methods. There are different methods that allow for that. For example, I think about inquiry-based learning, project-oriented learning, flipped teaching methods, flipped classroom, so-called, learning by teaching method. And by applying these methods, these can lead to a result in form of some creation, intellectual or artistic creation or whatever, which result can be summarized in a competence portfolio. Also, this idea of a competence portfolio should be, it's not new, it's old, but let's put it into practice. Finally, let's bring together these ideas and put it into practice. And this inside self-directed learning environment with a structure of autonomous democratic administration, with self-organized learning structures, and where teachers are not teachers but are mentors, helpers, or how do we call them, coaches. If you have this idea, you see that there is not this strict division between primary school, secondary school, high school, a college, university, make your PhD, research center. This core ideas, core values can be applied at every level, I think. Yeah. So.
Right. And so these alternatives are favoring the intrinsic over the extrinsic. So yeah, going back to the diploma, the certificate, those are extrinsic single sheets of paper that very much do not have what happened for 2, 4, 6, 12 years that you were being schooled, so to speak. And it's nice to have it. Some people put it up here because it means a lot to them. But what does it mean to what others see? It doesn't speak of who that person is too much. Here in the States, it's being uncovered that there's a certain merit that comes with the higher class to where they can essentially buy these degrees without having to go in. It's a corrupt system in a lot of ways, but without going into that, more towards the intrinsic, you said project-based portfolio, which even that, I guess you said it originated with Dewey, this portfolio, or at least he explicated it a bit more. But based on, I guess this is me being a little selfish, for me to develop a portfolio at my age, 36, as I have a bachelor's degree, but I didn't pursue higher education because I thought better of it. I had to drop out from it because it didn't speak to what I knew learning could be. I didn't know how to articulate it all too much, and it's being articulated much better now that I've read books like yours or pursued different leadings. But the idea of the portfolio would be great in place for the high schooler, the university student. But I'd like to hear a little bit more of how that would be pieced together. And also, I don't want to say it's too late for someone even in their 30s to develop a portfolio, but how would one go about developing that portfolio? How would we make that recognized by a workplace or the university or an employer, whatever? Because that appeals to me, this portfolio, but at the same time, it does need that change, and it's yeah, go ahead.
But I think but is it for you a problem of time, a technical problem, or a mindset problem, a cultural problem? In what sense does this for you?
Right. For example, the Aurobindo discussions we had, we spent 6 months going through one of the largest, densest educational experiences that one could possibly go through. We have the recordings as proof. We have a little bit of writing. So there was the creative output. Some of us put together the introductory talk for that, and we perhaps have the writing for certain chapters that we can put in a portfolio. But how do I explain my experience to my current employer or an employer out there that perhaps I guess I'm thinking more along the lines of what lines of work I could go into rather than the spiritual work that I would hope to be able to access. So that's kind of my example. The work we do through our passions, how can that become portfolio worthy, and how can it be recognized? Does that make sense?
Well, okay. One thing is what you gained personally as a at a psychological, inner, spiritual level. Of course, this is something that hardly can be translated in words on a piece of paper. So in this sense, a portfolio is, of course, also a limiting device, so to speak. But I think it is at least an enormous advancement and step forward to the classical certificate, that certificates that you have done examination with that grade, and there is a number, and that's all. In a portfolio, you don't simply, the portfolio is a chapter for itself and would need a session for itself, I mean. But a portfolio is not just a piece of paper like a degree, a certificate, that tells, okay, you have done this, this, and that, and there you got this and that grade or score. A portfolio is a precise description of what you have done, how you have done, how you came, how this creation came into being. For example, at an artistic level, you can describe how you proceeded, what you have done, how you have done, and at the end there is a product. I don't like this word product because we tend to think at something commercial. It can be also something commercial. Yeah.
You use creative presentation as an alternative to
creative. I think that if you are looking for a job and you go for you present a portfolio where your potential how do you call him, the one who gives you the job, you're the okay, those people who will employ you eventually have much more information about your skills and your capacities of doing that specific job by going through a portfolio than just a piece of paper where there's a number. And that if you ask this to managers, people who are in a position where they hire people, they will all confirm you that. So I think the portfolio is a much more effective way also to find eventually a work. The point is that probably there's eventually possibly a legal problem, that it is not legally recognized. But from the stuff in itself, it is, you've previously said it is all extrinsic motivation. I think in fact, it is just this gets to the point. It is about replacing the extrinsic motivation driven learning by a compulsory scheme outlined by a hierarchy with an intrinsic motivation driven learning by the free individual and the freedom of choice, so to speak. A scheme where people are allowed to learn and teach what they want, when they want and how they want it. And once we have this scheme set into practice, I think this problem is how to write a portfolio. We will do it. It's like keeping a diary of what you are doing day by day. And if these problems emerge, they emerge because you and I also have grown up into an environment with such a mindset, and it's difficult to imagine how to do things, but there is no real practical problem. The problem is, and by the way, how to make portfolios, there are, I cannot mention now the precise organization, but they've written books and books about this. There are specific procedures, and it is a science in itself, and the ideas are clear. it is about putting it into practice that this is
Right.
still missing.
And I like how you put it into the hands of the student, of the learner, rather than the teacher would be, there would be the mentorship perhaps to guide and direct, or reading a book about how to best frame it for those that perhaps might be, well, they might not be vocal enough to do a presentation, but there's alternatives for presenting this inner being, so to speak. And
yeah, this is different. Yeah, okay, I understand what you're putting.
So, like you're saying, we could talk about portfolio. That could be another week-long discussion. Is there something else you'd like to focus on?
No, just to close it, close this last thing. But the portfolio is not meant to present what your inner being is, what your inner being is capable of in manifestation. If you write a book, you write a book, and if you write, for example, also in very scientific environments, if you write a peer-reviewed paper, you have to present peer-reviewed papers. If you're an artist, you present a painting, a sculpture. If you're a musician, you present music. But you have created something. The portfolio is the account of what you are able to create with your skills. Whereas a certificate is only an account of what you are able to repeat, how well you are able to repeat. That's the difference. So, but okay, this is the closing remark about the portfolio. Well, what I can say, maybe I would like to say also what distinguishes the free progress education paradigm from other so-called libertarian approaches. I think it's, first of all, it's not only, okay, here now I'm probably contradicting myself, but the contradictions are always a way to understand better things. It's not focused only on primary and middle school education, but envisages this new pedagogical and didactical concept aimed at the liberation, I speak of liberation, I like this expression, of the liberation of high schools, colleges, universities, and even research centers, the way we do research and research centers. Because if you look at history of education, what came first? Schools and then universities, or first universities and schools, or both? Maybe you know, I don't know. Do you know?
I think the university idea was present.
Yeah. The universities came first. They emanated from the theological schools or in monasteries, but the first real educational institution were in universities, not schools. Nowadays we are trying to do this other way around. Perhaps this is also one of the reasons why it does not work. We have to think at all levels and create something new at all levels. And nowadays with the democratic schools, we are trying something, but it still does not go far away enough, I think. The other idea for free progress education is also that it tries to make a synthesis of the diverse alternative learning and teaching methods. This is also, we didn't have much time to go into this, but this is also something that I don't find somewhere else. And maybe also the third thing is also this idea and vision of the world or world university for human unity. I think this is also something that characterizes it. No, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. So free progress education going with the university, it's its own universe. It
Yeah.
includes everything, and as we noted, with these specializations or these schools that have a single focus, much is left out, or even if you go big, according to current standards, big means lots of funding. Big science often means going to the moon, getting the best minds to participate in this new science, new waves of thinking. But at the same time, the smaller stars in the universe, they're not allowed to flourish. You made note that some of the greatest minds in the past, before the schooling, the factory model schooling, or the idea of required schooling came into place, there were these individuals, never attended school, that became geniuses. And it's not because their water had a certain chemical in it that made them great thinkers. It's because there was some sort of freedom, or perhaps a community of individuals to help them flourish into this freedom. So yeah, you speak of space, the space in a way that is all encompassing. That a star could die out in a certain sense, to where if you pursue something, then if it ends up not being fruitful, it could easily be cut off from whatever. So with free progress education, your model allows for change, for being wrong,
For being,
being. And so that's what I appreciate about your vision, which of course is not just your vision. You've accumulated quite a bit along the way. So I like where you're going with this. I like where you've taken free progress education from when it was first kind of conceived in your mind. When did the book come out? Was that 2017?
Oh, I don't know. But this was a first version, an old version.
Right.
And
so,
now there's an updated version, 2018, I think. But it developed in the years, and it was like of book that you keep for yourself for some time, and then I published it later. Yes, but I think I will amend it also in the coming months and years, probably. Yes. Maybe I can say something, because sometimes I hear people making questions. The typical question that arises when I've made a little bit of introduction is, what can be done? What can we do? And the first thing I think is that to get rid of this idea to transform the conventional system, the conventional educational system from the inside. This does not work. I saw many people who got trapped in this idea, some of them spent also their entire life trying to change the system from within by being teachers or professors or whatever, and it didn't work out. And not only in one or two instances, but always. I think it's now a century that we see people trying to do that. And the only thing that I see for the future is that one must work from the bottom up. This means that we have to create small pockets of light, so to speak, and start a process where many such communities, free progress education communities, outside and independent from the conventional school and universities, will become a reality. by bringing together like-minded people with similar ideas and who share similar values, to create also physically, also in its infrastructure, several little free progress high schools, free progress universities, and also later eventually this idea of a university for human unity. And we need to create these structures without waiting others to do this for us, because especially here in Germany, we have this mindset that we expect politicians do things for us. I see a lot of people who are frustrated and dissatisfied with the school, with the system, with the college, with this or that, and they expect politicians do this for us. That won't work this way. And also here, if we want to liberalize and conceive of a new education system, and we have to put it into practice. And many like you said, like many little stars, and many little stars form finally a galaxy, don't they?
Right. And some of the examples that you gave, I'm thinking of is it the Methodos school?
Methodist, yeah, Methodist.
Not Methodist, that's a religious group, group, but Methodos. But essentially it sounded like these were high school students and maybe some teachers that formed their own free progress paradigm, but it fizzled out because they were in where they could find room, perhaps a library and a free room, or another structure where there was a free room. So it's not conducive of the infrastructure you're saying is a needed element, which I found to be refreshing in hearing and reading about technology will save us, or technology, if it won't save us, it's at least the key to bringing us all together. But as we know, there's always two sides. So there's the positive and negative of technology, and there's also the positive of having a university, but there's the negative side of being still stuck in the infrastructure of the mindset of the rules and regulation of a university. So in order to free up the progress, there does need to be a tangible element. And what we're seeing with the Methodos group, or even with the Cosmos Co-op, there's kind of a hub in Colorado, in Boulder, Colorado. But here, I participate from Kentucky, where there's not going to be like-minded individuals, or it's harder to seek out the like-minded individuals.
Yeah.
So technology is great for me, but at the same time, even though I'm outside of the educational system, there does need to be an actual Cosmos Café to where I could go in and speak with people here to make the change happen. So yeah, I'm interested in this infrastructure you're conceiving of here. And I know in the States, at least with the changes in retail, a lot of the malls are shutting down. So I envision, well, you're saying we don't have to build a university from scratch. We can work with libraries, work with the various aspects. So I wouldn't mind hearing more about how that comes into play in your vision.
Yes, there are two things. First, a very practical thing. Second, a mindset. Or let's do the opposite. First, a mindset, and then the practical thing. And the mind, you were speaking of Methodos. In German, you say Methodos. I don't know, but it's a Greek word, I think. This is a group of students from a high school, and who were dissatisfied about the way they were learning in this high school, they went out and did not invent a new school, but found for a room. They didn't wait for the politician, for the school, for someone else making the work for them. They decided, okay, we go out. This is a perfect example, I think, that you make, that shows how it is futile, hopeless to wait and hope that the system changes for us. They changed themselves, so to speak, and went out of the system and created something new. It's just a little example. It's only about, I think this year it's about 24 of students. So it's really an extremely tiny experiment. But it's very interesting because they took this decision, went out of the system and created something new. So without expecting others to do this for them. So this is first of all the mindset that you need. Secondly, well, they have a lot of practical problems because they needed to find a place where to do this. And after all, also this is not really free progress high school, so to speak, because what they do in this environment is that they study for an examination, for the state examination. But they said, we are sick of all these teachers who, this formal way of learning. We would like to learn by ourselves and to teach ourselves. There are also teachers that come and go and help, but there they have this function as helpers. And this is a nice example of how to proceed, I think. It's difficult, it's a much more difficult way, but it's the only way, I think. In a free progress, a full-fledged free progress education system would still have, of course, a place, an infrastructure, eventually also library, also a sort of dormitory, a college, how do you say, a campus, material, physical infrastructures, but which are intended more than a place where people can meet to learn together, teach each others together eventually, by the learning by teaching method. And it is not forbidden. If eventually they can also put all the structures that a normal conventional campus can have, but it is not necessary to reinvent the wheel. You can go also outside. Practicing sports, you don't need to practice also sporting facility on the campus. If there is a library, you can go also to another outside library. So this is also an organizational, infrastructural idea that I had, but I don't know if it's necessarily must be so. It was just a suggestion how things can be made otherwise. The important thing, I think, is that we must lose this idea of departments. There should not this clear-cut departments. Now I'm a physicist and work there and don't interact with no one else. We should perhaps recover inside this free progress education facility the idea of that already the ancient Greece had, of an Aristotelian school where all the subject faculties, departments interacted among themselves and fertilized themselves. And this doesn't mean that you must necessarily be interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, but that you live with people and interact with people from different backgrounds.
Right. Nora Bateson, you might be familiar with the systems theorist, or Gregory Bateson.
Gregory Bateson.
His daughter uses the term, she doesn't like the term interdisciplinary or even multidisciplinary. She uses transcontextual. So there's so many context layers that we reside in, and in order, it doesn't just simply do justice to take the disciplines and put them together. There's also the context, the ages, that speaks of the developmental progression. So even though, so you have the child up to the stage of the adult, but that goes along with you getting rid of the classroom or the grade system. So children are free to interact with adults, adults free to interact and learn from each other, rather than that top bottom. It's a horizontal approach. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, but you know what? The question is, why do we emphasize so much interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity today? Because we see that frequently people coming out from the conventional school system are not able to think out of the box. I don't think you learn this by learning a bit of everything. This is still the traditional learning, data crunching, number crunching learning. You don't learn interdisciplinarity by that. You learn it only by interacting with people who are of a different discipline in which you are specialized. And it is not important to know everything of everything. It is important to, when I need something that is not of my subject, that I have this ability and I have the skill to jump to the other discipline. It is about an ability, not about a knowledge. It is about a skill, and not about something, not about information. So, for example, if I'm a physicist and I would like to study biophysics, of course, I need to learn biology. But it is not so important that I know everything about biology, but it is much more important that I'm able to teach myself that parts of biology that I need to apply for doing biophysics. That's just an example. And precisely this school system prevents you from acquiring this ability and puts everything into knowledge. It's not about knowledge, it's about abilities. So that's what close the parenthesis about interdisciplinarity.
Well, we do have a conversation scheduled in a few days, and
yeah.
Is there anything else that you have? I personally, we could talk about this all day, but in order to perhaps not necessarily frame the conversation for Tuesday, but is there anything that's been left out of this that just like you were saying, we need to know in order to go to the next level, or to learn how to learn? Is there something you feel needs to be said?
I think that people should not be so discouraged, because people see that things go wrong, but feel that things are not, there's this feeling, and especially in young people and students and people who have to go through this educational system, and they feel this frustration and think that they are somehow out, there's something wrong in them. I would encourage instead these people to think that perhaps they are not, there's nothing wrong in them, there's too much right in them, in the sense that they feel how the system doesn't work and they realize it unconsciously. That's because I know this, because I was in the same situation previously. I felt that something with education, with the school, with this university, with this bulimia, how do you say, bulimia learning is wrong. And a lot of people are very good in this. Yeah? And you see these people who are perform extremely well in this, and you think, okay, I'm out of place. They should not be discouraged by this, and quite contrary, realize that perhaps they are more advanced on the path, and they will never again readapt to this old system. Whereas I would encourage them to inform themselves about the new forms, possible new forms of learning. I mentioned some of these. Project-oriented learning, flipped teaching. I like very much flipped teaching, learning by teaching, learning by doing, this inquiry-based learning. There are all these methods that are not practiced, and try to go into this, absorb this, and envision a new world based on a new form of education and teaching based on these methods. And then see why you suffered of the old system. Then everything becomes very, very clear. That's what I would like to encourage, especially young people who are eventually seeing this video.
Mm-hmm. And I think our times speak of change, as we've been noting, that there's the possibility of dropping out, which ties in more towards the negative side. But we see, I don't know if you're familiar with, in Sweden, Greta Thunberg.
Yeah. Thunberg, yeah, Thunberg, I think in Swedish you say, yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily have to be activism, but environmental awareness, the ability for one person, a child, 16 years old, 15, to change the way the world views a certain issue. Or in the States, there's a lot of school shootings, and students here got together and changed, or at least made others aware of the need for change more than any politician would be. So the top down is being met by these from the bottom that are coming up. So it's interesting where a lot of this will go.
Yeah, I think you made a good example that with this latest movement from Fridays for Future, and in America it has another name. Here in Germany we call it Fridays for Future. In America, what is the name of them? I don't remember. Okay, at any rate, this movement initiated by Greta Thunberg, I think this is a very good example, which makes because it's about school strikes. They strike. This is a school strike. They don't go to school because they pretend, from politicians, new something that has to be done for the environment. But I think down under, subconsciously, they don't frame it. They don't speak it out and rationalize this. But deep down, it is also a dissatisfaction with the school system, this movement, because they feel that, and Greta Thunberg said it also explicitly, that she doesn't feel that in school she is learning something for the future. She said, what's the point in learning things about the future that will not be? And there is also, I think, a more or less unconscious dissatisfaction with the school system, which still has not surfaced in its full manifestation, but it is something that will come, I think. It will become more and more apparent. now it's doing it's indirectly. In the future, I hope directly. Yeah? Hopefully peacefully. Yeah? Because you mentioned these school shootings, I don't want to say that all the bad things that happen in the world are because of the school. That would be a too simple formula, and it would be completely wrong. But I think it is also, among other things, our school paradigm and our this resistance to change, this extreme resistance to conceive of a different way of education that represses, as I said, our inner being, and this repression can also cause violence. I don't say that every school shooter would have not done that if they would have lived in a different educational environment, but I think school in this form encourages violence of this form also, because whenever you repress a natural unfoldment of the being, of our inner being, well, unfortunately, in some persons, it can also manifest in forms of violence. But hopefully, I think, hopefully these larger movements will, and I think we are on this way, they are realizing what is wrong with the system. It is still at a subconscious level, but it is slowly emerging, I think. And
right, and we note that it's been quite a few generations that have carried on this tradition, and
yeah,
where it's time to allow, not let it be a background issue, this need for change or the positive side of how to go about change, but it's coming to the foreground, and it can be a bit frightening with the clashes that might happen, but it is a time of change, as we've noted. So so thank you, Marco, for doing this interview. Appreciate it, and I hope you're able to attend Tuesday. I know.
We'll be surely there. We will continue our exchange there. Yeah, of course. So thank you, Doug, for this interview, and so we'll see you next time.
All right.
Bye-bye.